The Seiko Alpinist, a watch originally built solely for the Japanese domestic market, one that has become extremely popular in the watch community, and a model that was discontinued in 2018 and has garnered some controversy over the years as well. But as luck would have it, this write-up began at a time when the latest edition, the Prospex Alpinist, is in the process of being launched, and it really is something to pay attention to. First, the name, Alpinist, is a great one. A superb title for any watch. It sounds like a watch built for explorers, for adventurers. So the line originally began in the 1960s, made to be a dependable utility for Japanese mountaineers, cave explorers, hobbyists, enthusiasts. It arrived at a time when companies were experimenting with the sports watch genre for the first time. It needed to be rugged, dependable, simple, and hand-wound. The first edition came in the form of the Seiko Laurel Alpinist, a simple, dressy-styled piece that used a very distinctive dial, one that took a great level of inspiration from watches like the Zodiac Seawolf. It is an effective 60s dial layout that used simple triangular forms at the quarters, allowing for that element of symmetry while also keeping it visually interesting. Then we were introduced to the Alpinist Champion, a model that used Universal Genève pole router-esque elements, and many iterations came from it. The development of this line continued until 1964. Surprisingly, the next iteration of the line would only arrive in 1992, dubbed the Red Alpinist, simply because the text on the dial is printed in red. And here we see the form that most of us recognize in the family. Before addressing the modern Alpinist, there were two notable models that are both considered extremely rare today, being made in limited numbers, but they truly look fantastic. The reference SBCJ019, a black dial model that appears compact, neat, extremely utilitarian with a great attention to detail. This piece was made from titanium, housed a perpetual calendar movement, and just looked the business. Why this line was not continued into the future probably raises a lot of questions. Purely from a design point of view, this reference seems to be the tool watch in its entirety, taking what made the original line enticing and emphasizing a sports aesthetic, with offset compressor-styled crowns, sword hands, stark and monochromatic, with a simple use of spot colors. Then, building on top of that, another famous limited edition, known as the SSASS, a special edition piece made to commemorate a mountaineer who began the Seven Summits Action Sustainable Society, try and say that 10 times, to increase the level of awareness around the sheer amount of littering and waste left on historic mountains by climbers. It is a very special story, especially when we look at just how much waste was collected thanks to this campaign. So this edition of the Alpinist incorporated an identical aesthetic, but an ice blue dial with bright orange highlights, arguably one of the most radiant and exciting models in the entire family. Any explorer's watch deserves orange accents. That was the brief history of the line. And so now we transition to the extremely popular SARB017. And this is where the discussion will remain. Yes, there are others, like the SARB061, which looks incredible and seems to be a lot more appropriate as a built-for-purpose tool watch, but the 017 is what has received the most amount of attention in recent years, sitting basically on par with the SKX in the community. Both are sought after, both are praised for their uniqueness, dependability. The criticism it received is because of its price increase. As the model became more popular, so it became more expensive. It disappeared, only to now reappear with the Prospex branding and a new series of colors. Also, a very interesting redesign, but again, it has received a price increase. The base design of the watch needs to be critiqued though, because it is quite a strange one. What makes this reference unique, not just in the Seiko family but in the watch world, is that it rides the line between being both a dress watch and a sports watch. It's a style or aesthetic that companies refrain from adopting for the most part because it's polarizing. The process of understanding the design of a watch is easier when it sits in one camp, not both. You hear the name Alpinist and you think rugged, tough. Then you see it and say, well, it looks like a dress watch, not an oversized sports watch. When we expect to see a model with a simple dial layout that is easy to read, understated for the most part, What we get is a burst of emerald green with gold batons and numerals, a set of cathedral hands that are more aligned with traditional pilot watches and trench watches, then a rotating compass bezel housed inside the case that can be operated with a separate crown. Honestly, it's such a peculiar watch. I, for one, did not understand the appeal that it garnered at first, because it is a model that rides the line of trying to be both rugged and dressy, and as a result looks to be quite incoherent. A sports watch with more of a nod towards being a dress watch, but is supposed to be used in harsh environments, that uses a layout which does not necessarily help the user read the time easily at a glance because of its highly polished numerals, and frankly looks to be a model that is more suited for an entirely different terrain, not mountaineering. I hope you see where I'm getting at here. But then the thought was to look at it more closely, at what the watch offered. It is by no means your typical Seiko. It doesn't have a matte dial, a simple baton layout, a diving bezel. And that in part is why it is so appealing to the broader community, because it is different. It doesn't look generic in the slightest. We seldom find watches for affordable prices with emerald dials. And then for it to incorporate gold elements, it makes for a great addition to any collection, adds a bit of flash to what could easily have been just another sports watch. If we were then to look at the components, how could we define it? Clearly the inspiration was to follow more traditional motifs. The watch doesn't look to be modern. Maybe there wasn't even an attempt to make the piece look modern. Instead, it plays on motifs that were used in the early parts of the 20th century. So what could we say? It's definitely not a watch that would appeal to everyone. Most of us in the community prefer watches that have a clear outline, a direct stance, a sports watch or a dress watch. When a model rides the line, it divides opinion. The green and gold color choice is also a vanilla combination. Does it work well as a pairing? I'll leave that up to you. We all have our own preferences. If we were to investigate how the colors work, in certain lights the combination would look terrific. In others, the numerals virtually disappear. How practical is a compass bezel? It's unique. It plays to the character of an explorer's watch. There is a simple method of aligning the bezel with the sun to use it, so it is practical. How well does the modern typeface, spot colors, and numerals work in contrast with the dial and the gold indices? It does appear strange. There is this visual clash between modern and vintage, a conflict of interests. The dial seems too expressive for what it is trying to be, and that continual question of whether it is considered a utility tool watch or a dress-oriented sports watch keeps coming to mind. But we transition to the newer additions to the family. One of the most recent models was the 2019 Blue Alpinist, a limited commemorative piece made for the US market, with a gorgeous radial dial and silver indices. This color scheme seems to line up a lot more accurately with a tool utility aesthetic. Maybe the colors are cliché and generic when we look at the big picture, but it does feel like a scheme more suited for its application. And 2020 rolls in. We see the launch of the Prospex branded Alpinist. The new generation has an updated movement, 70-hour power reserve, and apart from that, the only real difference with the green dial variant is the addition of a Cyclops lens and the small Prospex logo on the dial. We also see another addition with a cream dial, which is very exciting. Great use of color for any mountainous terrain. We all love a polar. Now to the big addition, one that seems to line up with a lot of what the divided members of the community wanted, a black dial Alpinist, with applied shark's teeth styled indices, red highlights with a much simpler looking layout, with 5-minute markers behind the plots. And it feels like such an excellent addition to the format. This new piece, the reference SBDC 087, manages to call back to the 60s references and past roots. Not only does the watch now look like a utility, while still keeping part of its dress aesthetic, but also manages to remain old school. In this instance, the cathedral hands offers a refreshing look to what seems to be a more sports-oriented watch. It looks like a navigational instrument all of a sudden. The addition of a Cyclops lens could be considered hit or miss by purists, but as a package, this is a fantastic new piece to the family, mainly because it now shows a more defined footing in the sports watch category, while not eliminating all that made it great. this dial layout needs to be introduced with a handful of new colors. So the Alpinist, a watch that the community continues to love and appreciate. It is a model that offers a unique take by Seiko, one that isn't positioned around the usual dress watch or diver approach that we see very often, a model that manages to make quite a difference in the space. And the newest additions to the line shows a fantastic direction forward for the family. Seiko still remains faithful to their older generations of pieces, producing them, but also manages to strike an interesting balance between old and new aesthetics with a fresh series. Now all that needs to be asked is, does this combination warrant the professional specification stamp of approval? Are they overusing it? I'll leave that up to you.